My name is Helen Gavin. I'm based in the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford, and I work on the programme on integrating renewable energy. And I describe myself as a sustainability professional with expertise on water and renewable energy issues. Now, our first speaker is Rhys. John is a visiting research fellow also at the Environmental Change Institute. He is a former chief economist of the UK Electricity Council, and following this he has worked extensively as an advisor to national governments and development agencies on energy policy, tariffs and sector reform issues. He's keen to promote policies to limit the impact of the energy sector on climate. And then we'll hear from Hindolo George-Williams. Hindolo is based in the Energy Power Group of the University of Oxford, working on a project to improve the electricity supply of his native Sierra Leone via a whole systems approach. Now, prior to Oxford, Hindolo was based at Newcastle University, working on smart grid-integrated electric vehicle charging. And he has a dual PhD in risk and uncertainty engineering and nuclear engineering. And then thirdly, we'll hear from Kelcise Vidal Sesay. And Kelcise is the head of the Electricity Regulation Department at the Sierra Leone Electricity and Water Regulatory Commission. His tasks include developing performance and compliance indicators, performance benchmarks, and providing expert advice to the commissions. And Kelcise has an electrical engineering degree and master's in information technology. So, John, we would like to hear from you first. Please, can you take the floor and share your screen, please?
Well, this is a big subject, and my role today is to summarize some of the principal factors and issues that govern how power sectors develop. My colleagues are then going to talk about how some of these issues relate to the practical circumstances of Sierra Leone. So it's theory first and then practice. I believe there are four key parameters that operate to shape any national power sector. Each represents a big complex subject in its own right, and those subjects are both quite technical and that they also have almost as much politics in them as they do economics. So each of them is potentially controversial. The first two are access and reliability. That's our title today. And those basically determine, if you like, the size of the system. The next two, though, are also important, and they relate to the balance of capital and running cost, and hence to the investment choices. In terms of global policies to cut carbon emissions, the critical element of running costs is increasingly going to be seen as the value that we assign to CO2 emissions, to the emissions that are avoided. And finally, the cost of capital affects not just investment choices and the capital intensity of the business, but also affordability and prices. Let's look at how these factors play into the planning and development of a power sector. This doesn't have to be a formal planning process, but it's a helpful way of thinking about how investment choices are made. Now, if we take the first one, for example, in Sierra Leone, the percentage of households and communities with an adequate power supply is quite low. So one of the biggest factors is going to be access. How far and how fast can the network be extended or new local networks created? Targets and priorities for that process are going to be very important. Governments and utilities have to make big choices on where the expansion is focused, how fast it can be done, and then those choices feed into forecasts of both generation and network needs. Next comes reliability. This, combined with the forecast of load, affects how much reserve capacity and hence how much total capacity is required. Now, this is an economic choice. More reliable supply means bigger reserve margins and therefore more investment and higher costs. The basic principle should be to improve reliability for as long as investment can be justified by the economic value of less lost load or energy not supplied. Now, with modern control technology, that simple statement becomes increasingly complicated. For example, it may be possible to have different standards for different consumers and for different parts of the network. If we turn to running costs, Fuel costs have always been important, but the new and potentially dominant element is the weight that we attach to climate and emissions targets. We can do this by putting a price on carbon, but we have to recognize that this is what economists call an externality. It reflects the global benefit of lower climate risk, but that benefit doesn't appear in the cash flow of the utilities who are often making the decisions. So that's another area where we have a potential complication. And then finally, the cost of capital matters hugely, both in the choice of capital-intensive plant and for the total costs that have to be recovered in prices and tariffs. The cost of capital depends on lots of factors, including the way the industry is regulated and run, financial ratings, and where the capital is coming from. Getting funding from the World Bank or similar agencies, for example, is usually a big advantage in cost of capital terms, and it can reduce the overall cost of capital quite substantially. Now, this is not just a narrow technical debate about financial details. Depending on context and other factors, you might assess the cost of capital for a power sector as somewhere between 2% and 12%. We framed the discussion today as access versus reliability. So why should there be a conflict? The simplest reason is that these two objectives will to some extent be in competition for scarce resources, especially capital. Large parts of the Sierra Leone network currently suffer severe reliability problems, which already inhibit economic development, especially in industry. So there's a strong case for putting this right before extending networks and access. Extending access, on the other hand, may tend to have higher and rising incremental costs and lower and falling incremental benefits. At least that will be the argument that's often put forward. If so, there's a strong case for prioritizing reliability. Access without reliability is not real access. But there's also a strong case for access. It's reinforced by the fact that increased access provides the opportunity to reduce fuel emissions in communities that do not currently have electricity. This is in the displacement of other fuels such as diesel or traditional fuels such as firewood and charcoal. Now, there's also a technical issue. Reconciling reliability with those low carbon sources like hydro or solar, where output can be more variable, and that can be an issue. Now, it is possible to develop highly reliable renewable systems, but of course that too comes at a cost. Also, we should note that access plays into the agendas of other actors and stakeholders, especially donors and international agencies. These agendas include not just environmental issues, but also equality and poverty alleviation. Increased access will tend to benefit the poorest people. And of course, the government of Sierra Leone will always have a major say in this process, not just the utility. And the government will have multiple objectives as it tries to meet in terms of access, reliability, and economic development. So what are the key questions and observations that we might make? I think access and reliability sit at the center of a lot of policy issues, and this is not just about generation. In practice, at least as much attention needs to be given to transmission and distribution. Also, we can't afford to treat access and reliability as competing objectives. We need to recognize that access without adequate reliability is not real access. Then, thinking about the economics of reliability, the whole meaning of reliability is changing with modern systems and needs to be managed in different ways. I think quite a lot of thought needs to be given to this. That's not just for Sierra Leone, that's true in the UK, and I think it's going to be true everywhere. And then finally, the final message, I guess, is that climate agendas make a strong case for agencies to treat the sector as a priority for a range of environmental and social reasons. Now, this may, in due course, become a key factor in relation to finance and sources of funds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. That was a brilliant introduction to the subject. Quick question. The cost of capital is critical. And would you say that the cost of capital now is extremely low? Is now a great opportunity to roll out lots of beneficial programs?
Well, that's a very good question, Helen. I think in some global senses, the cost of capital is very low. There is a glut of capital worldwide. There's large numbers of entities, sovereign wealth funds, and so on, looking for safe, reasonable return places to put their money. So the cost of capital ought to be very low. But of course, the cost of capital in an individual country can be influenced by a number of other factors, partly how that country's credit rating is seen, and partly how good and how secure their financial, legal, and regulatory framework appears to be.
Okay.
So there's no straightforward answer, but simple answer is yes.
Yes, with caveats. Thank you very much, John. So let's move on to Hindolo.
Yeah, okay. Picking up from where John left, I have highlighted a couple of keywords to emphasize the relationship between reliability and access. According to the IEA, you have access if you have access to reliable and affordable electricity that is enough to meet your basic needs. And your supply is reliable if it's within an acceptable standard and in the amount desired. So which means if you suffer persistent blackouts and low voltage, you certainly do not have a reliable supply, and you most likely do not have access. In Sierra Leone, there's an inequality between access in rural Sierra Leone and urban Sierra Leone. Rural Sierra Leone has about 5% access compared to 45 or 46% in urban Sierra Leone. And you can see that overall Sierra Leone is amongst the countries with the least access rate. The map you see here shows the towns and cities with current grid access, and the green lines show the current transmission lines. And as you can see, most of the towns are isolated, which is not ideal for reliability and access. But this is set to change by 2030, and because there are a couple of grid extension projects on the way. The red transmission line you see here runs from Ivory Coast through Guinea to Liberia, and it will supply about 27 megawatts to Sierra Leone when it's commissioned later this year or so. In the off-grid space, there are about 58 mini-grids, solar mini-grids, and this should increase to 220 by 2024. And that should take access to about 100, well, to at least 115 of the 191 chiefdoms in Sierra Leone. A chiefdom is synonymous to a county in the UK. The reliability story is not rosy as well. The graph you see here shows the average number of outages experienced by farms between 2009 to 2017. And even though the situation is improving, at 9 outages per month, Sierra Leone has the most unreliable grid relative to its neighbors. The bar chart here shows the average number of outages experienced in Freetown per day in April. And by forced outages, I mean the blackouts that are due to some fault, some failure in the distribution system. We have expressed this as a function of the day of the week so that we can explore any correlation between load and number of failures. As you can see, the least number of failures was recorded on Sundays, and coincidentally, businesses are closed in Sierra Leone on Sunday. This has a wider implication because it shows that there is a link between most likely overloading of the electricity network and failures. Most of these were recovered within 6.63 hours on average, but 39% of outages were recovered after 5 hours. In fact, in one instance, it was recovered after a week. So you can imagine the inconvenience that brings to people. For businesses, however, it transcends just an inconvenience. Unreliability manifests itself as lost revenue, lost profit. The bar chart here shows the average extra, the extra spending on generator fuel by 4 fuel stations in Freetown between January and June this year. And this is not what they spent. They spent more than this. This just shows the difference between what they spent on fuel and what they would have spent on electricity bills had there been uninterrupted supply. Okay, so clearly this represents lost profit, and it represents the cost of unreliability to these businesses. So, you would like to ask yourself, okay, why are there challenges, with grid reliability in Sierra Leone, and in fact, I think the whole of sub-Saharan Africa? And one really simple reason is, reliability is very difficult to measure and monitor. Okay, and you cannot improve what you cannot measure at all. And this is due to several reasons that I have listed here. And there's also the issue of skills and capacity constraints, because even when you have the data, you need to be able to translate this data into actionable insights. And if you make a decision, you should be able to justify your decision. Okay, and the skills and tools required for these are not really available in Sierra Leone. And also, most of the grid assets are very old. In fact, some were installed as far back as 1961. So the only way you could improve these is replacing them completely, okay? And if you were to replace all the assets in the network, you need a huge financial investment. The utilities cannot afford this. The government is overstretched. Okay, and John has already spoken about the misalignment with donor interests, because donors are normally meant to come in and chip in and offset the deficits, but they seem to be more interested in the access argument. So these challenges also present unique opportunities to us. And I say us because I am Sierra Leonean myself. So, and one such opportunity is to leapfrog into the smart grid revolution. Smart grids have been used elsewhere in Africa to increase access, increase reliability, and reduce financial losses. Also, governments need to, design schemes that encourage local investment into the energy sector, because the utilities and government cannot afford, to bankroll all of these investments. Okay, and such schemes can be extended to other sectors as well, agriculture and the other sectors. Then we need capacity building. Okay, we need to invest in research and development. And this should extend to the schools, because we need to produce very good engineers that are capable of solving some of these perennial issues. And this also presents us with a unique opportunity to review our electrification strategies. Okay, and most importantly, we could even present reliability improvement as a commodity. And by as a commodity here, I mean the utility could say, okay, if you accept this tariff increment, for example, we can increase the reliability to this level, which could save you this amount of leones annually. Okay, and they could use the same argument for CO2 emissions, because 63% of our energy mix comes from renewable sources. And so to conclude, basically, okay, reliability and access are two peas in a pod. They complement each other, so we should not see them as competing interests. However, for a developing country, it's a bit difficult, to expect them to spend equal attention to both. Okay, so the only thing I would advise here is, they have to look at the trade-off, the economic benefit of increasing reliability or access. And they could also join the smart grid revolution. And in addition to this, they could look at optimizing some of the processes in the energy sector, because solving the issues in the energy sector transcend just solving some of the technical issues. And finally, there should be a robust national electrification strategy that sets out the pathway to achieving some of these recommendations. And plenty thank you is a Creole phrase that means thank you very much.
Thank you, Hindolo. That was excellent. I have a quick question for you before we move on to Kelcise, which is, if some of the existing electricity infrastructure in the country is so old, how can it be merged with the smart grid revolution? What kind of smart tech can properly integrate with the existing infrastructure?
That's a really good question, because most often when people hear of smart grid, they start thinking of SCADA systems, the most sophisticated systems. But no, okay, smart grid systems can range from simple smart meters to say rooftop solar systems to current limiting devices. There are devices that will just ensure that a household's energy consumption or a power intake from the grid does not exceed a certain level. And so if we are able to cut down, for example, how much power each household sinks from the grid, we're able to reduce the stress on these aging, very old infrastructure, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Plenty tanky, Hindolo.
Yeah. Okay, so my own part of the presentation will take a look at the ongoing sector reform within Sierra Leone and how it aims to improve electricity access and reliability in Sierra Leone. I'll go through these three issues by taking a look at the electricity landscape as it is, and during the reform process, at the start of the reform process, how the electricity landscape looks like. And then I'll delve into talking about the electricity sector roadmap, which is the main guiding document that the government of Sierra Leone is using for its reform process. And then I'll talk a little bit on regulatory efforts to support access and reliability within Sierra Leone. So taking a look at the landscape in Sierra Leone, at the initial stages of the rollout of the roadmap, this is what the country looked like. This was 2019. And in 2019, we had 160 megawatts in installed capacity, and the main hydro plant, which is the baseload Bumbuna, accounted for 31% of that, and then 60% from thermal generation. It could be noted that we had very little penetration of solar renewable energy, which is just 3%, and imports of electricity is zero at that time. Then, as we continue a look at the landscape, we see that the proportion of households with access to electricity is also quite low, around 15.2%, and then the electricity generated per capita is also quite low. And the number of district capitals with electricity supply with some grid arrangement is just 9 out of the 16 districts within the country. And this, as we can see, is not a very good state. As such, the government decided to do the reform process and start seeing how we can improve on the access to electricity and also the reliability of the supply. So in order for us to be properly guided, the roadmap was developed with the main objective of creating an enabling environment for the provision of energy services that will increase productivity and the quality of life of Sierra Leoneans to be improved. So because of the issues that were plaguing the sector, the roadmap identified a number of points that it was going to focus on so that we can improve on these areas and then increase access and reliability within the country. So generation issues has always been a huge problem for us. So the roadmap is targeting bringing more private sector involvement into generation and also improving on the ability of the state-owned utility to meet its generation targets. And the issue of renewable energy and renewable sources is, as we all know, that's the way forward, that's the way for the future. So the roadmap also is looking at having additional renewable sources within the energy mix so that we can optimize our energy mix. So the previous speaker, Dr. George-Williams, spoke about the issue of the utilities being unsustainable, and that's quite true. So the roadmap also thought about that point and is trying to create that pathway towards financial sustainability for the utilities, especially the state-owned utilities. And in terms of expanding access, the electrification of the whole country, it's quite a huge task, but the roadmap proposes an on-grid and off-grid approach. The off-grid approach, we've seen the development of many grids throughout the country, and it's quite a vibrant space right now. And in terms of the increase in access also, Dr. Rhys spoke about the fact that it's not only generation that should be increased, but also transmission and distribution. And the roadmap also proposed that the roadmap is looking at having an upgrade of the distribution system, a strengthening of the current distribution networks within the country, and also an expansion of the transmission system. From one of the previous slides of the previous speaker, we could see that there is basically one transmission line at the moment, but there are plans in place to establish all the transmission lines along the south of the country, along the east, and along the north of the country, so we can have that integral backbone to be able to take electricity to every part of the country. And the other major point that the roadmap also highlighted was integration within the West African power pool. So the West African power pool has the Côte d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea component, which we call the CLSG component, and it's currently under construction. The Sierra Leone component is 80 to 90% complete at the moment. And when that becomes completed, then we can also improve on the electricity access by getting imports and improving our generation mix. So this slide gives a snapshot of what the roadmap aims to achieve within the electricity sector by 2020 when the roadmap ends. So within this image, we can see at the very top the entities that will be responsible for ministerial oversight of the sector, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Finance, and two new entities, the Rural Electrification Authority and the Energy Management Fund. But then to the top left of my screen, with the yellow boxes, we see the regional entities, the power pool players, that's the CLSG, Transco, and the regional regulator. Now within Sierra Leone, the roadmap intends having the current generation and transmission company, known as EGTC, to be split into a generation entity and into a transmission entity so that they can work more efficiently. And then it proposes the introduction of a market operator and the systems operator that will be responsible for dispatch and governing the electricity market. So it proposes the integration of more and more independent power producers that will complement the generation efforts of the state-owned utility, and also make the market quite competitive. Then there is the Electricity and Water Regulatory Commission, which will be responsible for regulating the whole sector, ensuring that there is this conducive regulatory framework wherein all of the players will be governed by some form of laws and rules so that they will know how they can operate well within the market. Another new entity to propose is eligible customers, which would be entities or businesses that can buy electricity directly from generation companies or from the transmission entities themselves. So this is what we intend reaching by 2030. So this timeline shows one or two major milestones that the roadmap envisage in terms of local generation assets within the country. Within the short term, we're expecting the import of electricity via CLSG, and then we're expecting by 2022-23 some large-scale solar plants, utility-scale solar plants, and towards the end of the medium term, the introduction of the Bumbuna 2 hydro dam, which will be the country's biggest power plant by the time the roadmap ends. So now we want to see what the roadmap envisages by 2023 when the medium term starts up. So if all goes according to the plans in the roadmap, by 2023 when we start the medium term, we will be having up to 260 megawatts. And the most important point here is that the imports would have increased from 0 in 2019 to up to 80 megawatts, which will form up to 31% of the generation mix by then. And finally, in 2030, when we will be rolling up with the roadmap, we expect to have achieved up to 750 megawatts in total generation capacity. But the important points to pick out here is transmission would have increased up to 2,000 kilometers of transmission lines in the country, and distribution also would have increased up to 1,600 kilometers of distribution lines in the country. And definitely, we will also be seeing some more improvements in the solar plants, up to 110 megawatts of solar generation within the energy mix. To round this up, I just wanted to throw light on what the Regulatory Commission has been doing in terms of its efforts to support access and reliability. So in terms of improving access and getting private sector investment into the country so that we can be able to bring electricity to every corner of the country, the Commission has done quite a number of regulations, and the two that speak towards increasing access is firstly the license rules, which will govern the regulated entities and then create that enabling environment for market entry. So the private investors that might want to come into the market will see that the country already has a very good environment for the investors. And then the mini-grid regulations primarily govern the mini-grid operators and the operation of mini-grids within the country. The regulations speak towards mini-grids that are up to 2 megawatts for individual sites, but it can be as large as 10 megawatts in aggregate. And in terms of improving reliability and utility performance, well, a number of regulations and codes have been done that will tend to hold the utilities accountable for their performance. And the service quality and consumer service rules is one such tool that will tend to monitor the performance of the utilities in terms of supply reliability, in terms of operational efficiency, and the quality of the supply that they give to the consumers. And the set of technical and operational codes that have been developed, which include a grid code, and this will contain operating procedures and principles which the participants in the grid will have to follow. And the bulk of the content in these codes is aimed at enhancing the reliability of the electricity system. So, in conclusion, we have had serious issues with very low access to electricity and the poor reliability of the network. But then the government has taken measures. The government has created the roadmap, which is the guiding document for sector reform. And the roadmap aims, amongst other things, to improve on sector planning, to improve on the procurement process of electricity generation, to improve on access to rural towns and villages, developing sustainable business models for the utilities, integration into the regional market, and also more integration of renewable energy. And quite important, the attracting investments, private sector investment into the sector. And the Regulatory Commission primarily has been supporting the process in trying to create this enabling environment so that the sector can develop. And it has been doing this through its regulations that aim to increase market access, price issues, and also improve on the quality of the utilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelcise. I'm going to ask a question from the chat pane directly to you, which is, will the operation of the CLSG in Sierra Leone depend on the completion of construction works in the other countries, or will its operation be independent?
So far, the arm from Côte d'Ivoire to Liberia has been completed, and the Sierra Leone component is between 80 to 90% completed. So as soon as we reach 100% completion, we can start getting power from our neighbors, Ivory Coast, and we will start benefiting from imports.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Could you please stop sharing your screen, and can John and Hindolo take yourselves off mute, and I'm going to be firing questions at you. We have about 10 minutes left, and we have lots of fab questions coming in. Another one for you, Kelcise. How do you think local politics and political transitions will impact the energy roadmap?
The roadmap is one such document that the past government and the present government have sort of reached an agreement on, because they see it as the way forward for economic improvement and the development of the country as a whole. So despite there being a change in government, the new government has embraced the roadmap. There have been one or two alignments according to their policy objectives, but then they are 90% following with what the roadmap says.
Okay, thank you. Question for you, John. A couple of people have asked this, which is, how can you describe consumer behavior when it comes to energy? And this is a key challenge for the question, George Cabot, who posed this question.
Yep, I picked that up. That was one of the first questions. There were two parts to it, actually. One, because somebody else came in and said, in particular, in relation to energy efficiency. So I might answer that first. I think in general, there are two measures that you can take to promote energy efficiency. One is to make sure that people don't have the incentive to waste energy. So if too much of it is being abstracted illegally or is not being paid for at a reasonable rate, then people will have an incentive to waste. So prices and tariffs are quite important to encourage efficiency, but I don't think they're enough on their own, and there are lots of regulatory measures that you might want to consider for energy efficiency. For example, in relation to use of energy efficient light bulbs, which are going to be slightly more expensive for the consumer in terms of initial cost, but which have a big big sort of longer term payoff. In relation to reliability, I think one of the factors you have to recognize in anywhere where reliability is not very good, that consumers will take actions to protect their own interests. They'll behave in an entirely rational way that won't necessarily help you manage the system any better, though.
Hindolo, there's a question from Grace. Can you elaborate on the definition of energy reliability, i.e. could you aim for high energy reliability between certain hours of the day as a first step, for example?
Well, the answer is yes. But reliability, generally, let's take your car for example, okay? And you wake up in the morning and you start your car, it wouldn't start, okay? So if this happens many times, it's not reliable. So energy system reliability is just the ability of the system to do what it's meant to do. Basically provide power that meets your basic needs.
And those basic needs need to be defined, and they will vary.
Yes, well, which means you need power when, you get power when you need it, and you do not have surges, you do not have low voltage. There was one instance when I was in Sierra Leone, I had access basically, but most times the voltage was I think 140 volts, so I couldn't use it. So that's not reliability.
There was a question about voltage. Let me just see if I can find.
Yes, from Michael. Yes.
Okay.
Maybe Kelcise will answer that, but I'm not aware of any study that has been done in that direction, and I think it needs to be done because if you go to social media now, on WhatsApp, on Facebook, every day people are complaining. My appliances are gone because of surges. So Kelcise, maybe you could throw some light on this. Has there been any study in that direction, or is one planned anytime soon?
The studies on voltage issues has not been done. The utility is trying to improve on their power quality issues by doing a number of network strengthening and upgrade, especially within Freetown, and they expect to have issues relating to voltage and other power quality issues solved or mitigated by the end of that project. I think this might warrant some sort of studies that will probably compare what the status is now as to when they would have completed these upgrades.
A question from Andrew Groom. Is there a national strategy for procuring power from IPPs, independent power producers?
As part of the strengthening of the capacities of the entities within the power sector, the Millennium Challenge Coordinating Office out here, they had done some work on developing an IPP solicitation and procurement process, and the documents are being finalized and are ready for implementation, but at the moment I don't think they've started implementing it because I've not seen any such tenders that have been placed out for generation or so. But the documentation has been done. It just left with us to start implementing the process. There is an IPP procurement framework in place. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you another question. The results of an energy master plan in 2018 suggested electricity generation from natural gas would be economically viable. Is there any plan to incorporate that into the country's energy mix?
The ministry held an energy roundtable sometime in January or so. During that program, there was an entity that presented a pre-feasibility study on the possibility of incorporating natural gas, LNG, within the generation mix. So the ministry is taking a look at that possibility. And I very much believe that will be a good way to go, because we see that natural gas prices are usually quite stable, and as such, it will enhance our generation mix if we decide to go down that line. So just to answer Andy's question is that proposals have been sent to the ministry, and the ministry is taking a look at those possibilities.
Okay, we have just 1 minute left. This is such a fascinating topic. So this last question, please answer it briefly, is addressed to Hindolo, but please, speakers, all of you, give your comments on this, which is about governance. From George, he says a lot of illegal and fraudulent issues happen within the energy sector, and certainly tapping into the grid illegally is a phenomenon. So what measures can be put in place to minimize the fraudulent, corrupt practices that exist?
Okay. Well, as I said earlier, some of the issues with the sector transcend just technical solutions. Yes, I agree the technical solutions will work, but they need to be integrated with organizational structures. For example, they could set up an energy auditing team, okay, that like a task force that will be charged with the responsibility of weeding out these people, or they could educate the public, because most times people do these things and their neighbors know that they are doing it. Okay, so if public education is really stepped up, then every other person becomes a security. So if they see an instance of illegal abstraction or someone tampering with their meters, then they could just call, say, a hotline or this task force, and they could pick it up from there.
Okay.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit on that also. Now, as part of the roadmap process, because of the huge system losses within the distribution networks, the Ministry of Energy has decided to do what it calls a grid loss verification exercise. And had it not been for the COVID-19, we would already have had inspectors going out there to different parts of the country, or no, Freetown primarily, to be able to identify where these grid losses are occurring. So in terms of illegal abstraction, pilfering, and all of that. So there's a grid loss verification process that is set to be rolled out as soon as the conditions are favorable for the inspectors and all to go out and do that.
Okay. And we need to leave it there because we've now run out of time. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining this webinar. I hope you found it interesting and provided lots of things to think about. Let us say thank you to each other and goodbye by waving. So thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye.